Okay, I want to go into this clip here from Charlie's main guy, Andrew Colvett, about what was going on with Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA before Charlie was tragically murdered, assassinated. I think it's very telling, and also it's extremely frustrating because a lot of this conversation about Charlie's views on Israel and what was going on is just completely outrageous. It's fair. We can just say it's completely outrageous and frankly stupid. So let's get started with what Andrew has to say.
And you asked me this earlier, so let me make sure I'd say it. Charlie's position on Israel was very clear. I like them more than I like Hamas.
First of all, I haven't spoken to Charlie specifically about that question, but I don't even agree with that framing. I'm sure Andrew doesn't mean anything by that, but clearly Charlie prefers Israel to a genocidal terrorist organization. So that's just uh, uh, almost irrelevant, but clearly it wasn't even a question.
I just wish I was free to criticize Israel and not be labeled an anti-Semite, because I can criticize my own government and not be called anti-American.
Right.
But why do I have more freedom to do, that and not criticize, a foreign government? And he was really upset that there was this sort of clampdown on the freedom of expression, the freedom of ideas, free speech when it came to a foreign government. And I will
Now, this is actually an important point. I think that there are some people in the pro-Israel movement that reflexively say some pretty outrageous things when people challenge the government or challenge the army. But the answer to that is, I'm coming from the right place. Please let me be. There's a question about some of the sources about how people come up with ideas. So, for example, if someone were to say that Israel is committing a genocide, it's not, and cite the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry, that is not a proof positive that there is a genocide. So, if someone were to take issue with someone like Charlie Kirk citing the Gaza Health Ministry, that is not the same thing as clamping down on free speech. I can say from personal experience, I've been a very outspoken critic of a lot of the behavior of the leadership of the IDF, failing to provide sufficient number of helmets or ceramic plates or vests to frontline combat soldiers. And I'm very outspoken about that. There are some people who say, okay, this should be dealt with privately and very quietly. For a time, I tried that, but it didn't really work. So I have been very outspoken about it. But the answer to people who are trying to quote unquote quiet you or to stop that conversation is to essentially ignore them and to know that they're coming from a good place as well, but you have a disagreement on this issue, and that's fine. The idea that therefore you're having your free speech restricted is a little bit outrageous.
say this: he felt like he had earned the right as a friend of the Jewish people over the years and all of the things that he had done. He felt like his bona fides in that respect were unassailable, and that he should have the freedom to say, hey, it's time to end the war. Hey, it's time to stop the killing. But, when you, with Tucker, for example, yeah, I mean, we took some pushback, we lost some donors. And what's interesting is it wasn't necessarily Jewish donors, although there was, because that's a misconception about Turning Point's funding base, by the way, is, it's not a whole lot of Jewish donors. It's just not. There was always, I saw the comments online like, oh, the Jewish shekels or something like, I mean, it's all this gross stuff. It just wasn't true. And it isn't true. But we did lose, one in particular towards the end that was frustrating.
This has been alleged to be Dr. Bob Shillman, Doctor of Philanthropy. I can understand why someone like Dr. Bob would be upset with Turning Point having Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson has had some absolutely insane people spreading anti-Semitic conspiracy theories on his podcast consistently for the last year. So someone can say, I'm going to make a free market decision and I don't want to fund an organization that's giving a platform to this crazy person, Tucker Carlson. That's a fair decision. That doesn't mean you're being restricted. That doesn't mean that anybody's saying you can't talk. That doesn't mean that anybody thinks you're a bad person. You're allowed to just say, that's not where I want my money to go. So this huge conflation is rather outrageous.
There's this great clip when we were in Myrtle Beach, and he got asked if, from somebody in the audience, if he was going to, debate Candace or, disavow Tucker. And Charlie's answer I thought was amazing. I remember he came off stage. He's like, "Do you like that one?" And I was like,
he would always ask that for reassurance.
Yeah. He always loved like, "Did you see that? Did you listen?
Yeah. Do I look good? Was that a good clip? Do you think that'll go viral?"
Yeah. And I remember saying like, "Yeah, I thought it was amazing. It was morally so crystal clear." And he basically said, "I don't appreciate being morally blackmailed." And and every time people would say that to him, he would dig his heels in. It's like, well, maybe Tucker's going to give 2 speeches now at MFest.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'll invite so-and-so.
That was one thing, like Charlie and I relate to him so much, is that him and I both do that, where we don't like being told what to do.
Oh, I've noticed that before. By the way.
I know. Yeah. Andrew, I'm like, oh, there's so many things that we could talk about. How many times Andrew and Charlie have had to put out fires for me that I've started. But like, when I'm told I can't do something, it's like, well, I'm going to do it even harder then. That's just my personality.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie is very much the same way.
I think that's the key. It's like Charlie was a friend of the Jewish people and a friend of Israel. Did he have opinions about the prosecution of the war, he thought their PR was abysmal, thought they were doing more harm than good in many ways for their own cause. So all of those things were true, and he was upset that he couldn't express those things freely.
Oh, stop. I'm sorry. I can't even. It's crazy. Listen, you can have a free market decision about what people want to sponsor and whether or not that is worthy of being promoted and encouraged. It doesn't mean that anybody thought that any serious person thought that Charlie Kirk was anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish or anything like that. I don't know a single person that is a serious thinker that knew Charlie that thought he was anti-Israel or anti-Semitic. Yes, there were some issues with some people in conservative circles like Tucker Carlson and others who are saying outrageous things. And unfortunately, that infects the public conversation. But I think that a few donors saying that they don't want to put their money, even if it was many donors saying they don't want to sponsor Tucker Carlson to speak to students on college campus or at a conference, I don't think that in any way is anything other than a free market decision. The people who were making the loudest noise about Charlie being anti-Semitic were the AJC, the ADL, those types, hard left organizations that are completely detached from Jewish values. These organizations wouldn't know a Jewish value if it smacked him in the face. That doesn't mean that Charlie Kirk didn't like Jews. Charlie Kirk loved Jews. Charlie Kirk loved Israel. And there's plenty of people who love Israel and have a lot of issues with what's going on in the war, myself included. There's ways to go about having that conversation. And it's unfortunate that in some ways it's manipulated into saying that there's a restriction on free speech. I mean, anyone who thinks there's a restriction on free speech just needs to go to Tel Aviv, Motzei Shabbat, and see what's going on with the Hostage Families Forum and other actors that are doing some pretty over-the-top things, justified or unjustified. But the idea that you cannot speak about Israel or about the war is completely crazy. There's an information war that's being played out. And that is largely having to do with the fact that you have Qatari-sponsored Al Jazeera and other alleged media figures putting out garbage 24/7 that's completely detached from reality. So you're fighting information wars with college students who are on TikTok seeing fake news promoted as a legitimate genocide being carried out by the Jewish state against Gaza. So having a discussion about which commentators are having good faith conversations in which commentators are actually spreading anti-Semitic conspiracy theories is in no way trying to limit free speech. And the people that are mad about the quote unquote billionaire donor class, I keep seeing people say, okay, so raise your money elsewhere, raise a GoFundMe and go do it. If you want to be able to really move the needle, you go to people who have benefited and who have done well in American society, and you ask them for money or you don't ask them for money. Just raise. It's hard. You can raise from everyone in the street. You can go to California and go on the street in Los Angeles and try to raise money to sponsor speakers who are more critical of Israel. Go ahead and do it. So the whole concept is just absolutely crazy. And then you see just the danger of how some of this poison is infected into other aspects of the conversation. Just the other day, comedian Dave Smith had Max Blumenthal on his show, not to critique him and debate him, but to promote him as one of the preeminent thinkers that Dave Smith is watching. So the concept that Charlie Kirk, or Turning Point USA, hosted a debate with Dave Smith in which Dave Smith is given an equal platform, I could see how some people would say that's concerning. Now, I'm not against debating Dave Smith. I would love to debate Dave Smith one day. But if you're giving your money that you earned and you worked for, and there's a nonprofit that is hosting Dave Smith, and you think that Dave Smith equals Max Blumenthal because Dave Smith says he gets his information from Max Blumenthal, I can understand how some people would not want to fund that, because the Overton window has been shifted. So now what is acceptable and what is acceptable conversation has been adjusted. It's completely fair for someone to challenge if that's a good use of their money. That's not unfair. You might say that that's surprising and that you have donors who really should trust Charlie. That's an argument. But the concept that Israel or Jews are coming down and saying you cannot discuss this is absolutely outrageous. There are Israelis that live in America that organize, if not daily, on a weekly basis to protest the Israeli government. When Israeli government spokespeople or members of the Knesset come to America, there are groups of Israelis that organize to protest them. There is so much discussion going on. There are so many opinions. The idea that there's no ability to discuss this is outrageous. And in that spirit of free debate, people are allowed to have those discussions and people are allowed to push back. Do I think it's appropriate to call someone an anti-Semite because they're making a legitimate, good faith critique of Israel, their PR, or how they're going about the war in Gaza? Absolutely not. And if anybody did that, they should be rebuked. But part of having conversations in public and having a very large platform is that people will have opinions on what you say. And that comes with the territory. The way in which the hard left is trying to spin this Charlie story, and I'm not putting Andrew at all in that hard left, God forbid, but how they manipulate what he says there is they're essentially trying to make it like a group of college students or high school students that want mommy and daddy's credit card and should just be able to do whatever they want. If someone who's a billionaire, a millionaire, or doesn't have two pennies, but they make a donation to your organization and they want the organization to reflect a certain set of values, it is entirely fair for them to make a request of how the money is spent. I have never heard of an organization that thinks you just have to give us the money, get out of the way, and let us do our thing at all times, and you're not allowed to ask. Tucker Carlson has been responsible for some of the most absolutely obscene anti-Semitic conspiracy theories of the past year. He is just yesterday or the day before promoting the idea that Israel pushed America into the Iraq War. Of course, there's no evidence that Israel pushed America into the Iraq War. What he means is the people he used to refer to as neocons, also known as Jewish people who worked in the Bush administration, Tucker is now reclassifying them as Israelis. He's harping on the idea of dual loyalty. So yes, people are going to be a little concerned when you are promoting that person. And that's well within their right. There are so many people who can support all sorts of different causes. God bless them. But this idea that the Jewish billionaire class is coming and doing this and that, and it's outrageous. You work hard for your money. You can spend your money however you want. And when you make a charitable contribution, you're allowed to have strings attached. I remember when Max Blumenthal was attacked by Andrew Breitbart, or shouted down by Andrew Breitbart, I should say, as saying, I think, the most despicable life form that's ever existed, right? You now have someone who's taking all of their information from Max Blumenthal. That person is named Dave Smith. And he's going on stage debating the merits of supporting Israel. I can understand how a conservative Jewish donor would not want to fund that. This really is not that complicated. And to make it so it's some sort of nefarious thing is absolutely obscene. This is a basic free market charitable contribution that someone can have an opinion. And there's this undercurrent of anti-Semitism in which a Jewish person who works hard for their money, who is very generous, gives a lot of money, and therefore he asks that his money is directed to something that is ideologically consistent with what he believes in, to then challenge them as saying that they're some sort of overlord and trying to control people. There is a slight anti-Semitic undercurrent there, which is very hard to avoid. Now, I think there are certain players that are doing it intentionally and others inadvertently. But the idea that there was nefarious intentions is really a bridge too far. Part of what's going on with the civil discussion, or what's supposed to happen in civil discussion, is that you have civil disagreement about certain issues. The second you start challenging the motives and the motivations, and you start saying that these Jews are trying to push certain ideas, it really just doesn't sit well. I don't see people doing that with Christian Catholic donors. There's a certain thing where it comes up with Jews. And now you see people like Tucker Carlson trying to really push that dual loyalty angle. So yeah, it's fair for Jewish people to be a little bit concerned when the likes of Tucker Carlson are elevated on these platforms. In fact, it's fair if non-Jews, if you notice in that clip I played before, Andrew also mentioned that there were non-Jews who were upset about it, which makes a lot of sense. Because for some people, promoting anti-Semitic conspiracy theories is just a bridge too far. Nobody said that Tucker can't speak. Nobody said that Dave Smith can't speak. There's a question about whether or not philanthropic dollars should be subsidizing them platforming this kind of idea. And that's totally fair. And it's the opposite of having some sort of crackdown. They're trying to make it like Soviet Russia where you can't talk about it. Of course you can talk about it. You're saying, why do conservative donors need to fund this behavior? That's the question. So ignore the noise on everything else. You know, the absurdity of the Blumenthal fake reports about whatever the heck is going on or happened in the Hamptons is completely false. And again, it's worth noting that most of the people saying these absolutely crazy things, they know they're not going to get sued, because what billionaire or regular business person even would want to go into discovery with a lunatic like Max Blumenthal or like Candace Owens? So the threat of the legal repercussion isn't even really there, because they're going right up to the line and they know that if they sued, it would make it a much bigger issue. You'd have access to text messages, and nobody wants access to text messages for the public like that. Just look at Tom Brady and the whole Deflategate scam. He didn't want the NFL having his cell phone. He was married to Gisele Bundchen at the time. Why would he want to have third parties given access to his personal data? That makes a lot of sense. Bill Ackman would not want his cell phone subpoenaed for a number of reasons, but nothing nefarious. So what they're doing is they're taking advantage of the fact that the legal system really doesn't have a protection in this case, and they are spreading outright lies. It's important to see right through this, to see exactly what it is. No, Charlie was not getting threatened. No, Charlie was not being told that he couldn't speak about these issues. You might have had a few crazy people, and maybe even a crazy donor or two, say some things that are above the line and perhaps inappropriate. But that's a far cry from claiming that he couldn't speak about these issues. And anybody out there who says they can't speak about these issues, send me a message, send me an email. I'd be happy to talk about these issues. There's no issue that's off the table when it comes to Israel and their prosecution of the war. As I said earlier, I've been very outspoken and upset about a number of things the IDF has done and the Israeli government. Have people said a few crazy things to me? Sure. Do I care? No. Should anybody care? No. You can have a discussion. I hope that it's based on facts and not based on false propaganda from Al Jazeera or the Gray Zone or other places. That's the discussion. The discussion has to do with if people are taking fabricated ideas and fabricated facts on the ground, quote unquote, and promoting them as legitimate. That's a very fair critique, a very real critique, and one that can be addressed. But that's not the same as saying that people are saying you cannot talk about issues in Israel or talk about issues in the America-Israel relationship. That is very much not the case. So anybody that's saying that is either genuinely misinformed or perhaps even pushing this false propaganda for a reason which can be explored later. But it's important to note nobody is stopping that conversation. It can happen. It should happen. It actually will strengthen a lot of the relationship between between America and Israel. So that's just my take on that. I'll be back later for more on a few different items, but any thoughts, questions, shoot over a message. Thanks for